So welcome back to the BioBlast podcast. I am Devin Zeidelman, Director of Scientific Real Estate Advisory Services with Scheer Partners. And I have the pleasure of meeting with Kathie Callahan Brady, who is the Chief Executive Officer of FITCI, which is the Frederick Innovation Technology Center Incorporated. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kathie.
My pleasure. Fun to talk with you.
Yeah, so before we get into all the things that are happening in Frederick, Maryland, would love to just know more about your background, your journey, how you came into the role, really leading the incubator, accelerator from a physical space presence, but also all the support services that you have at FITCI. But before we dive into that, as I mentioned, would love to get more of an understanding of just your professional journey.
Sure, my pleasure. How I got into FITCI, it's kind of an interesting story. I was just selling my last business, and I was in a CEO roundtable called Vistage, and 60-year organization working with CEOs, and something that I've always just loved doing. So I was doing issue processing on what am I going to do next, because my background was in computer science, and then I went off and got a doctorate in naturopathic medicine. Always loved the entrepreneurial journey, and I've always loved real estate. So one of my colleagues who was in that CEO roundtable, he said, "Oh my goodness, you love working with entrepreneurs." He said, "We're really looking to do something very different in Frederick, and we would love to have someone like you come and work at our incubator." One, I didn't even know what an incubator was, to be honest with you, but I thought building an entrepreneurial ecosystem just sounded like an absolute blast. And from there, it sort of launched. And when I had gotten to FITCI, I thought, it is perfect because it was launched from Vistage, and I should probably create like a CEO roundtable inside of the incubator to where we've got some high-level CEOs advising our companies. And that's just kind of where the whole thing sort of started.
Yeah. And so now you operate physical space in Frederick, a lot of those support services. And at the end of the day, some really astounding numbers just for folks to understand the breadth of what you do. FITCI has created over 1,100 jobs, raised over $160 million during the pandemic and afterwards, contributing $84 million to the economy annually. It's currently home, as of this report, to 74 companies. I'm sure that's grown since then. But Frederick has really come into its own as a sort of biomanufacturing hub within the life sciences. You have companies like Kite Pharma and others that have planted a flag there. And so, what are the benefits in your mind, or how are you selling Frederick as a life science opportunity for companies and specifically for biotech companies?
Coming from somebody who has grown their own businesses in other areas, and I've traveled throughout the U.S. and other countries, Europe as well. I came into Frederick, and I thought, not knowing from anyone in Frederick at all, I thought, what's the one thing that I can do for the startups that's going to make the biggest impact? And I said, it needs to be finding some high-level CEOs that will advise them and, of course, volunteer their time to do that. And I thought my first year, if I could find 12 of them, I would be doing really well. The first year, I found over 28 of them. And what I realized very early on is that it is just easier to do business in Frederick. There's something about it, and I call it sort of the connected sort of community, where it's easier to get rooted, it's easier to get connected, and people really want to help here. So it's kind of that small town feel in a large town, or not organization, but community. The biotech community here really rallies around others. I'll give you an example. I had an Ireland company here 2 weeks ago, and they were trying to determine whether Frederick would be the right place. Really, they were trying to determine if Maryland was the right place for them, and whether their clientele was here in this local area. And I thought, well, the only way that I know to do that is why don't I just bring in some of the other CEOs? And in a week's time, I was able to put together 4 different meetings, and each meeting had 8 to 9 different CEOs where, I just sent an email message out. And I had never really thought about it. I'd be able to get that many people together in a week's time. Now, there's a whole bunch of them that were busy and not able to come.
Right.
But to be able to just come to help somebody else is just not heard of in most places. And I think that's part of the reason. Now, you've got all of the rest of the things that, if I was an economic development professional, I would be talking about the education systems and the school systems and the other ecosystems that are around here. But personally, from a entrepreneurial perspective, I think the biggest thing is it's just easier to get connected here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good example, I think, of how you're working with companies and working with site selectors to help kind of position Frederick as this, emerging hub. That's really, north. It is north of the I-270 corridor, as you know. It's about 20 or 30 minutes north for folks that are less familiar with the geography. And the center of gravity is kind of stretching beyond, I would say North Bethesda and then kind of Gaithersburg, Germantown, and extending its way into Frederick. And so over the last 5 or 10 years, and as you look towards the future, what do you attribute some of that growth to? And what are some of the opportunities?
Good question. I think some of that growth, when I look back on it, again, I said I'm not from Frederick, but I raised my kids in Gaithersburg. And I was driving down the 270 corridor into DC and Georgetown each and every day. And naturally, I found that what I wanted to do was you found yourself growing as your business was growing, your family is growing. And naturally, you find yourself going north or going east or going west. And part of that is because there's just not enough space where I was, and the prices was going up and going up. It's a little bit more expensive in the Bethesda region where, I sold a house in Gaithersburg at one point and bought a, house that was twice that size in Urbana. And then just recently I sold a house in Columbia and bought a house twice the size for, half the price. And so part of it is just naturally there is still more space that is out here. And there's that natural sort of sprawl and that natural growth. But I think part of it is also, if you look at it from a geography perspective, it is much easier to zoom down 70 or to zoom up 83 or 95, and you're on that transportation corridor. And so it's this perfect triangle of being able to get to Philly or being able to get to Pittsburgh or being able to get to New York. So much easier than if you're down, I'm not putting any other area down, but some of it just has to do with geography.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at just general access, road infrastructure, it certainly is strategically located. I mean, we have a project up in Newark, Delaware. I think my colleague was saying how it took maybe an hour and a half to get there or less. And so, to your point, it does have some different value propositions than you would see in some of these established clusters. When you think about established clusters, though, a big part of that is access to facilities, specifically for life science businesses and entrepreneurs and startups. And, you all already operate some existing wet lab facilities and accelerator programs there in Frederick. But you also have the grand opening of an additional space at the Edge later next month. And so what is your approach to space and functionality, and what do they offer compared to maybe some others?
Sure. So it's funny because one of the things that we say is we're just so much more than space, because many people come to us and they always want to look at the space first. And the space is beautiful. Don't get me wrong. It's brand new, and we're constantly renovating even our existing lab space at Metropolitan Court. But our new lab space at the Edge is stunning and beautiful. But we say we're so much more than space because we have a 93% success rate that is just unheard of when most startups are failing 50% of the time the first year, and then 50% of those are failing the second year.
Yeah.
To have a 93% success rate is just unheard of. But we have that, and we have that for lots of different reasons. And it's the programs that we put in place. And it's also, some of it has to do with the space, but it has to do with shared lab space. And having people start in a place. It also has to do with the core lab. It also has to do with, I'm constantly preaching, don't run out of money before you hit the finish line. And so lean startup method is just critical. We have programs in place and people in place that will help them get started and get their lab set up as inexpensively as possible. And so, to set up a new lab, that equipment is outrageous. And especially if they're going for the nice, brand new, shiny equipment, that doesn't always work. So we have lots of programs, and we get out there and drive lots of trucks, normally, budget moving van sort of trucks, to go get used equipment for our scientists. And we do whatever it takes to get them over the finish line. And there's a lot of different things that we do from a marketing perspective. Our marketing is about marketing them, not about marketing us. And so they are our success and sort of our tools. But our new space, I'm excited about because it's been a 5-year long endeavor. And it has a beautiful 4,500 square feet of community space. We have a community manager that is really working hard to make sure that the rest of the ecosystem is really connected. So those natural sort of collision happens with our biotech community. And that's not just our community that is here on site, but that is bringing our outside community to our companies and our members that are inside. So you have to drop by and see it. It's a gorgeous indoor-outdoor space with a beautiful fireplace. And we have just done the cornerstone dedication where we have buried a time capsule inside of the fireplace.
Oh, wow. Well, let's hope that's fireproof as well.
It is.
We don't want memories going up the chimney, but I think you make some good points. And in any ecosystem, you have the physical space, then you have that network of community, right? And so when you think about just the work that you all are doing related to attracting businesses, training, upskilling the next generation of life science workers, and really thinking about the labor force that you have, what is, if at all, your approach to workforce development and some of the maybe complementary efforts that the state is doing to continue to grow the industry?
So my approach is creating an unfair advantage over some of the larger life science companies, because, they can really toss money at them, but the startup community really can't. So part of what we've done is we've built a beautiful education lab here. And it's something that when I look at the number of even high schoolers who barely have the opportunity to be inside of a lab, very few of them come out and even know how to do proper pipetting because they haven't really been inside of a lab. So we have an education lab here. We have partnered with 4 different companies and universities to train do on-site training so they can work with my startups. So they come in when they're looking for their original idea of what they're going to run with. I always say I have 74 companies here. All of them can probably convince you that they've got a really great idea that they should work on. And then they come at the end and they present that. So they get to, and I just throw pizza parties for them so they can really collaborate with one another. And then what we're hoping and what has turned out is that those interns want to continue to hang out here because they get 74 different projects versus just one project to actually work on. And that helps to build their resume. And I'm a huge fan because that's how I got my start, was in an internship program. So
Yeah, I mean, upskilling the workforce, but giving, you know, young adults and folks pursuing different educational pathways, the ability to learn about science and STEM, particularly in the K through 12 setting, is super important. The fact that you all are providing internships for the hands-on technical skills that are required within the lab. They're using the same equipment that they would be using at a large pharma company in their research and development labs. And so, in 18 years, FITCI, you mentioned 74 companies, but almost 260 companies have actually come through. And so what kind of programming can people expect? I know you have, for example, your CEO advisory groups and your pitch competitions and your startup university. But what can folks expect in terms of the types of programming that maybe they can take advantage of?
Oh my goodness, isn't that enough? So we do have strategic growth and advisory board that you mentioned, that, no one else has that. And I'm sorry, when it comes to, I've heard some people say, oh, well, we have mentorships and they're listed on our website. An entrepreneur, and I know because I am one and I work with entrepreneurs all the time, they're not going to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help. So that four-letter word just doesn't come out of our mouth. So part of our program is that you have to come to this once a quarter, and they realize how powerful that really is. From that tells us what they need, and from that is what our startup university really is about, and that's where our classes come from. We also we have a 500 person ecosystem at least, and part of that is our power partners. And so our power partners on Tuesdays put on their talks, tours, and we call them tails for cocktails every Tuesday and stuff. And so there's constant learning, and it is money talks, and it is opportunity talks, and it's sustainability talks. Every single Tuesday is a little bit different. And that's to help bring the community together. So there's those pieces, and then the other types of roundtables that we do is CSO roundtables from a science perspective. And then there is strategic marketing roundtables that we do as well. And then whatever else it takes to get them across the finish line is what we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see you rolling up your sleeves and being very integrated into the strategic planning for FITCI, for now into the future. And so speaking towards the future, the sector is diversifying. Maryland's known as a agricultural state, certainly in the north and east of the state. And so, with the way that you're approaching some of these emerging technologies, in particular ag tech, it sounds like you're taking a more concerted approach to sort of be the group or the accelerator or the landing spot for ag tech companies in the state of Maryland, and then obviously in particularly closer to our region. So how are you sort of thinking about diversifying across sectors? And then if you can also speak just more specifically to ag tech.
Sure. So I guess it was probably 4 years ago when I found myself sort of looking up, and I was looking at all the different companies, and I went, wow, we have a large group. And I hadn't even thought about categorizing them as ag tech. But I think that's when it started sort of really revealing itself that we have a significant amount. And then, and I can't really remember exactly what came first. But Mike Tilke and I started talking, and we came up with a program, and we came up with a grant and stuff together because we wanted to be able to bridge, the entire state of Maryland, sort of across the entire state, with resources just related to sort of ag tech. So we came up with it's called the viaduct, and we did our first accelerator with specifically with a call out just for ag tech companies. And from that, we ended up with 40 companies. Very difficult to shave that down to 20 companies. I think 14 of them graduated from the program. Many of them are FITCI companies now. And what we've realized is that as we have built out this new center, the Edge, it looks like where we're heading, the old center, as we are renovating it, is going to be pretty much all biomanufacturing and ag tech, because it's become such a growing industry. And we're working with more and more partners to be able to provide them with the resources that they need as well. So I think there's more will be revealed on that. But we're already starting to do quite a bit in that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an emerging sector.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I think is really a different offering than what you see in some of the, more regional municipalities and geographies. And so, when you think about Frederick, Maryland in particular, and you think about the community that's there, in my mind, I kind of go to more of like what I'm coining as like blue collar, blue coat type of workforce or white coat. Can you just speak to the community that's there and the types of folks that you're interacting with on a daily basis?
Well, the ones that come in here, majority of time, I look at it like one of these days, I think I need to start counting the number of PhDs because the majority of them that do come in, they are a highly educated group of individuals. And I think that's the sector that I'm dealing with, but I think it's across, from a Frederick perspective, you've got it across both sectors, which I think is really important. But yeah, majority of the ones that I'm dealing with here in the incubator are PhDs.
Yeah, so a very educated workforce. And, more importantly, you all have been nominated as a finalist for the BioBuzz Awards. And, a lot of that has to do with the scientific community and the level of talent that you're pulling into Frederick and into FITCI. And so what does it mean to be recognized by your peers, as awards finalists?
It's funny, people don't see me as a shy individual because they're always seeing me on stage or something like that, but I am very much so shy. And this sort of recognition, especially by my peers, especially with a group of people, is deeply humbling, to be honest with you. And I'm grateful with it, and I'm thrilled just to be nominated at this point. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And within a similar lens, we're grateful for you joining us today. We're thrilled to hear about the Edge grand opening next month. We'll make sure to attend it. And thank you for joining me today for this episode of BioBlast. Kathie Callahan Brady, President and CEO of FITCI. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Much appreciated.